Today I'll be showing you how to make a Zelda heart container pot holder. For the design, I went to the Zelda wiki. There, I chose the Breath of the Wild heart container image to use as reference. I imported the reference image into Inkscape in order to create a SVG. First, I traced around the entire heart container using the pen tool. Next, I traced around the golden overlay, taking care to include all the curves and details. For this top section, I chose to create an additional path. Then, I used the Path Difference tool to remove it from the previous path. Once I was happy, I used the mirror effect to copy it to the other side. Then, I converted it into an outline and adjusted the size. Now, onto cutting. First, I taped both of the pieces together. Then, I cut out the heart. In cutting it out, I also cut out all the fine details. In hindsight, I shouldn't have cut this out, but rather traced it directly onto the fusible webbing. Here are my pattern pieces cut out. I took the fusible webbing and roughly cut out a heart shape. Then I ironed the fusible webbing to the yellow fabric. Taking the pattern piece, I traced it onto the fabric with the fusible webbing on the back. I tried to use minimal pins to reduce warping. Also, I checked several times to make sure I traced each section before removing the pattern piece. And then finally, I marked which sections of the pattern needed to be cut away and removed. Taking the small scissors, I cut out the pieces. I found it easiest to create a small incision in the center and then slowly work around the edges. Taking the wet fabric, I roughly cut out another heart shape. I peeled away the fusible webbing backing and checked the fit. I ironed the wet fabric flat and then placed the golden overlay over it. Starting with the center, I made sure it laid completely flat before ironing. Once it's ironed, there's no way to remove or fix creases. When ironing, I also worked from the center outwards, using gentle presses instead of sweeping motions which could create creases. I double-checked the edges to make sure they were completely fused together. To trace the heart outline on the front, I placed down the pattern pieces and traced around it with the pencil. I repeated these steps to create a duplicate heart piece. I used the heart piece to roughly cut out a piece from heat resistance batting, one for each side. I'm okay with it having 2 layers, as I personally prefer having thicker pot holders to prevent burning my fingers. I laid one side of the heart container fabric on top of the insulated batting. I pinned these layers together, placing pins just outside the center heart shape that I would be sewing on. For sewing, I used a matching yellow thread. I aimed to keep the stitches a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch from the edge. In order to be accurate, I took it quite slowly and paused often to pivot the foot around the points. I repeated this process until I had sewn around the entire piece. The sewing took time and patience, but it wasn't difficult. then I repeated this process for the other side. Once the sewing was complete, I cut off all the loose threads. Then, to put it together, I sandwiched the two sides, wrong sides together. Initially, I started pinning these pieces together. However, because there are small variations between the two sides, I decided to hand baste the layers together. This allowed more accuracy in keeping both the sides aligned with each other. To trim the piece, I marked a 1/4 inch away from the pencil line I had marked earlier for the heart shape. This allowed me a 1/4 inch seam for the edging. I then cut around this line, trimming through all the layers. For the edging, I cut 1.5 inch wide strips on the bias from the yellow fabric. Because my strips were not long enough to wrap around the perimeter of the heart, I sewed several together on the diagonal. Then, I poked it through a bias tape maker to make the strips into bias tape. I pinned the bias tape around the entirety of the piece. When I got to the end, I cut the start of the bias tape, folded it over, and overlapped it with the end of the bias tape. This prevented any raw edges from showing without dealing with the hassle of attaching the two ends together. I sewed around the piece, taking extra care to align the corner and inverted corner to the midway point of the heart. Once sewn, I trimmed down the excess fabric. This trimming prevented the edging from being too bulky from the 2 layers of batting. Then, I turned over the edging and pinned it into place. I chose to hand sew the edging on the back. This resulted in a cleaner finish. However, you could also sew on the machine by stitching in the ditch and catching the edge on the back. Once the sewing is done, remove the basting stitches, and the potholder is complete.